Hi, I'm Carter. I brought him the tie he forgot. Just wanted to help. Just wanted to be kind. But when I opened that door, my sister, my own sister, was draped across his desk like a gift. Naked. Clutching him. Kissing him like I'd never even existed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I said 5 words. And I walked away. But what happened after? That's the part they never saw coming. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from right now? What time is it for you? Drop it in the comments below. Let's see who's out there when everything unravels. I've always thought of myself as a steady man, not flashy, not reckless, dependable. The kind of guy who keeps his promises, does his job, and puts his family first. Sorrel used to say that's what she loved about me, that I was her anchor in a world full of chaos. That morning, the house was already quiet when I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold, sheets pulled tight like she'd been gone for hours. I sat up, rubbed the back of my neck, then wandered to the bathroom. That's when I saw it, my navy blue tie, the one with the subtle diagonal stitching, the one she gave me on our 5th anniversary. It was hanging off the door handle like a forgotten thought. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. She always said I wore it like it belonged to me, like it made me someone important, and I guess I wanted to feel important to her again. She'd mentioned her big client walkthrough today, some luxury build-out up near the lake, so I figured maybe I'd swing by, drop off the tie. A small surprise, a little spontaneous. She once said she wished I was more like that, unpredictable, in a good way. It was almost 10:15 when I pulled into the parking garage of her firm. I'd helped finance the place when she wanted to go out on her own. Her name was on the glass now, Sorrel Ashford Interiors, in gold serif lettering, perfectly spaced. I walked past the front desk. One of the junior designers gave me a smile, offered me coffee, but I waved her off politely, said I just needed to drop something off. She nodded, clearly used to me showing up with flowers or takeout. I wasn't some absentee husband. I showed up. I took the private elevator up, the one with the brass trim she'd picked out herself. The doors opened directly to her office. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek walnut desk, polished concrete floors. I remember thinking how proud I was of her. The door to her office wasn't fully closed. I figured she might be on a call. I didn't knock, just nudged it open with a smile and held up the tie. What I saw took a second to register. There was Sorrel, on top of the desk. Her hair tangled around her face, her hands gripping the edge like she was trying to stay grounded. Her back was arched, her face flushed, and there was someone beneath her. Their mouths locked together, bodies moving like there was no one else in the world. I stood there frozen, my fingers still holding that damn tie. It took me a second, maybe more, to realize who it was. At first, I thought it was some guy from her team, someone I didn't recognize. But then I saw the mark on her shoulder, a small, faded constellation of freckles. My heart slammed against my ribs. Rowena, my sister, my little sister. I couldn't breathe. They didn't notice me right away. The rustle of silk, the soft sighs, the kind of sounds that used to mean love, but now felt like betrayal pressed into the walls of a place I'd helped build. The tie slipped from my hand, hit the floor with a sound softer than a whisper. Sorrel's head snapped up. Her eyes locked on mine. For a second, the room stood still. She froze, mouth parted, like she wanted to say something, maybe beg, maybe explain. But Rowena? She didn't flinch. She leaned back against the desk like nothing was wrong. One corner of her mouth curled into a smirk I'd never seen before. Cold. Triumphant. That was when I knew this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was a choice. Mine was simple too. I didn't yell. Didn't ask for an explanation. Didn't collapse or rage or punch a wall like some cliché. I just looked at them both. then said calmly, like I was stating the weather, "You never have my loyalty again." And I turned around. The elevator ride down was silent. The kind of silence that sticks to your skin, crawls into your ears, makes your heartbeat sound like a drum. I didn't cry on the way out, didn't cry in the car, didn't cry when I drove for hours and parked in front of my mother's house. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, eyes on the porch. I didn't even ask myself why they did it. Some answers don't matter, because some things, once broken, can't ever be put back the same way. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the cornfields by the time I pulled up to the old Ashford house. I sat in the car longer than I needed to, hands still gripping the steering wheel, engine off, the ticking of cooling metal filling the silence. I hadn't been back here in years. The paint on the porch railing had peeled, and the porch light blinked like it couldn't decide if it wanted to keep shining. Some things never changed. I walked up slow, gravel crunching beneath my boots. The old boards groaned under my weight as I stepped onto the porch. I knocked once, then twice. No need for a dramatic entrance. This place wasn't the kind that welcomed surprise. The door opened halfway, and there she was, Clarice Ashford, my mother. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, scanned me from head to toe, and said, "You look awful. Did you lose your job?" I stared at her for a beat. No hug, no warmth. Just that same blunt tone she always used when she was bothered by something that wasn't hers to control. "No," I said, stepping past her, "but something got lost today." The smell of her famous cornbread filled the house, but it didn't comfort me like it used to. It just felt stale, familiar in the way regret can be. I dropped my keys in the old ceramic bowl near the front door, the one Dad made in his night class after he retired, and followed her into the kitchen. Dinner was already on the table. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. She poured herself sweet tea and didn't ask if I wanted any. "You just show up out of the blue like this?" she said, slicing into her food. "You could have called." I didn't answer. I wasn't here for a social visit. She didn't press. Instead, she launched into a casual monologue like we were just catching up. "Rowena's been doing better, you know. She's seeing a therapist now. Says it's helping her process all the pressure she's under." She glanced at me. "You should be more supportive." My fork hovered in the air. I set it down. "She's always had big feelings," Clarice added. "Like your father, passionate, raw. You never understood that." I let out a soft breath and leaned back in my chair. "Dad had integrity," I said. "That's what you mean?" She frowned, clearly annoyed. "You always twist things to make yourself the victim, Carter." That was rich. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. And then, without warning, the memories started coming back, like they'd been waiting just under the surface. I was 13. Rowena was 10. She fell off the porch, nothing serious, just scraped her elbow. But when Dad asked what happened, she pointed at me without blinking. "He pushed me," she said. I didn't even get a chance to deny it. My father, usually slow to anger, didn't hesitate that day. He took me by the arm, marched me inside, and told me to hold on to the banister. I remember the sound of the belt, the silence that followed, the way my skin stung for hours. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I heard the door to my room creak open. I pretended to be asleep. Rowena's voice was barely a whisper. "You deserved it." I never told anyone, never fought back. Even later, when she stole from me, lied about me, called me lazy behind my back, I forgave her, or told myself I did, because that's what family does, right? We forget, we let it go. But forgiveness without truth, that's not healing. That's just a slow kind of rot. Clarice was still talking, still defending her. "She's got that fire," she said, "just like your father. You were always more reserved, quiet." I nearly laughed. My father had been a lot of things, but impulsive wasn't one of them. He believed in doing right, even if it hurt. He taught me loyalty meant something. He taught me not to quit, and if he'd been alive to see what Rowena and Sorrel did, he would have cut them both off without a second thought. I didn't say that. What was the point? I stood up from the table and walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Clarice asked, not even looking up from her glass. "To get some air." The attic hadn't changed much. Still dusty, still filled with the leftovers of a family that didn't like throwing things away. I turned on the little lamp in the corner, its light barely reaching the walls, and sat down on the old trunk I used to keep comic books in. That's when I saw it. A shoebox, tucked behind an old fan. I pulled it out and popped the lid. Inside, old photos, notes, a few ticket stubs from concerts I barely remembered, and then, under it all, a folded piece of paper. I opened it. A drawing, clearly old, done in marker. 3 stick figures, one labeled Sorrel, one Rowena, and one Carter. They were holding hands. But above my head, in red ink, were the words, "Carter doesn't belong." Rowena's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. So this wasn't new. This wasn't about Sorrel. This was who she was, who she'd always been. I just refused to see it. Maybe that's the real betrayal, not what they did, but what I let myself believe all these years, that I mattered to them. I put the drawing back in the box, closed the lid, and leaned against the wall. For the first time since this morning, I felt something close to clarity. But when Clarice said the word inheritance, I finally looked up. She stood by the sink, rinsing her mug like she'd just asked about the weather. "Your father's will. We never really talked about it, did we?" I didn't answer. My mouth felt dry, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She continued, casually. "He updated it a few months before he passed. Nothing too complicated. He wanted things to be simple, equal, you know?" I raised an eyebrow. "Equal?" Clarice dried her hands on a dish towel. "Well, Rowena helped him simplify it. He was tired, Carter. Things were getting harder for him. She took care of the paperwork." I let the silence settle between us. Clarice didn't seem to notice or care. She placed a plate of cold toast on the table and motioned for me to eat. I didn't move. "I remember Dad saying he wanted us to split things fair," I said, finally. "He told me that last time I visited. We even talked about the land." "Said he wanted to keep it in the family." Clarice shrugged. "He did. But things changed." My stomach turned. I stood and paced a little, rubbing the back of my neck. "What changed, Clarice?" I asked. "Did he change, or did someone do it for him?" She looked up, eyes flat. "He wasn't himself, Carter. Not toward the end. You weren't here. You wouldn't know." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "So what happened?" She hesitated just a beat too long. "The house was transferred to Rowena. It's in her name now." I blinked. "The house?" "And some other things," she added. "He gave her his shares in the agri-equipment company, too." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dad would have never," I started, but she cut me off. "He did. Because she was here. Because she helped." She manipulated him. Clarice's face tightened. "Don't be dramatic. She was present. You were busy playing the city son, doing your own thing. He needed someone, and she stepped up." I stared at her, stunned. She added, more to herself than to me. "Rowena said it'd be easier this way. One person handling everything. Less messy." I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out without another word. The air outside hit me like a slap, sharp, cold, real. I got in the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway like I was chasing something I'd lost. Town was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like an hour. My thoughts spiraled, twisting around themselves. Dad wouldn't have left me out. Not unless someone pushed him to. Not unless he was already slipping. The courthouse hadn't changed much either. The same linoleum floor, the same sleepy air. I stepped into the records office, nodded to the clerk, and asked to see the most recent filings tied to Benjamin Ashford's estate. The woman, probably in her late 60s with tired eyes and an efficient tone, disappeared into the back for a few minutes. She came out with a dusty folder. I sat at the long wooden table and opened it. There it was, the updated will. Stamped. Signed. Notarized. I scanned the pages. House to Rowena Ashford. Share transfer to Rowena Ashford. All personal belongings, including tools, machinery, and vehicles, to be handled at her discretion. My name appeared once, a passing mention. I leaned closer, studying the signature. Dad's name was there, but the handwriting, it didn't look right. The loops were too loose, the line shaky. He had firm penmanship, even in his 70s. I flipped to the notarization line, signed by Darlene P. Kessler. I blinked. Darlene Kessler was part of Clarice's bridge club. I remembered her laughing over iced tea at our 4th of July cookouts. I remembered her once saying I was the quiet one. Of course it was her. I sat back in the chair, chest tight. My whole body felt cold. Not the kind that makes you shiver, but the kind that settles deep in your bones. I didn't slam the table, didn't curse, didn't storm out. I just sat there, processing. A clerk passed behind me, humming. The world kept moving. But for me, something had shifted. Something cracked. There was no going back to what I thought was true. Dad was gone. And in the months before he died, the people closest to him had quietly erased me from his legacy, all while smiling. I flipped back to the front of the file one last time, and that's when I saw it. At the bottom of the ledger was a handwritten note. Final amendment requested by Rowena Ashford. In her own handwriting, she erased me on paper first. The rest? Just followed. I didn't sleep much the night after seeing Dad's will. My brain kept looping the same question. Why would he hand everything over to Rowena? I knew the answer, and it wasn't that she was more present. It was that she knew how to plant seeds early, quietly, steadily, until the roots took over. I saw it happen in our dad's orchard every spring. I just didn't expect her to treat him like one of the trees. So I ironed the tie. That tie, the one she left on my desk years ago in Chicago, back when she needed an introduction to the CEO I was mentoring, back when she still acted like being my sister meant something. I slid it into my coat pocket and headed out the door. Downtown was already pulsing by the time I pulled into the parking structure. Rowena's firm sat on the corner across from the old courthouse. 6 floors of steel and privilege. I hadn't been here in years. Last time she invited me to celebrate her firm's expansion. This time, I wasn't invited, but I was still showing up. Inside, the marble gleamed like a hotel lobby. The receptionist glanced up from her monitor and froze. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Ashford? Do you have an appointment?" I shook my head, calmly. "No, but she'll want to see me." She didn't move, didn't buzz anyone, just stared as I walked past the desk like I belonged there. And maybe I did, once. I followed the signs toward the main conference wing. Her name was on the glass wall, Rowena Ashford. Partner, etched clean like permanence. Through the clear partition, I saw her. She was in the middle of a pitch. PowerPoint glowing behind her. Executive types seated around a glossy table, jotting notes, nodding. Her voice was that polished tone she always used when she wanted something. Confident but sugary, like honey with a bitter aftertaste. I opened the door. She paused mid-sentence. Every head turned. The room fell silent. She saw the tie in my hand first. Her gaze dropped to it like it had a pulse. I held it out, not moving from the doorway. "You left this on my desk," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to cut through the stillness. She blinked. Twice. For a second, her face went pale. Then the smile returned. Quick, tight, too rehearsed. "Ah," she said. "My brother. Always the joker." She tried to laugh. No one joined her. A man near the end of the table leaned forward. "Wait. Brother?" Rowena's hand twitched near her tablet. "Yes, this is Carter. He, used to work in strategy. In Chicago." Used to. I smiled. Just once. That same half-smile she used to give me when she wanted something and thought she'd already won. She faltered. Her pitch notes were in front of her, but she wasn't looking at them. She was watching me. Like I was the one holding the remote to her PowerPoint, and her whole presentation could vanish with one click. The client leaned back, arms folded. "Interesting. You two seem close." Her voice caught. He's just stopping by." "I'm just returning what was left behind," I said, placing the tie neatly on the corner of the glass table. Didn't want her to forget where she started. I turned without another word. The whispers started before I reached the elevator. Staff outside the room were already pretending not to stare. One junior assistant nearly tripped over a filing cart trying to get out of my way. Phones buzzed. Heads turned. I didn't need to say more. The silence I left behind said enough. I stepped out into the sunlit lobby, where the receptionist was still watching the hallway I'd just come from. Her mouth parted slightly, like she wanted to ask but didn't dare. Good. Let them talk. Let the story circulate. The queen of the firm, thrown off her script by the brother she tried to erase. In the truck, I leaned back against the headrest. Let my breathing even out. Let my thoughts settle. That tie? It was never just a tie. It was the thing she used to get in. She'd smiled at me then, thanked me, said, "I owe you for this." And she repaid that debt by quietly slicing me out of Dad's legacy. But now that same tie was the first stone in my rebuild. Because Rowena didn't know I had more than just a tie in my hand. I had the email. One file, one PDF, one forwarded email chain. It was almost too simple. I sat at my desk with the tie still folded on the armrest beside me, the silk catching the glow from the desk lamp. My inbox was open on the second monitor, the email sitting there like it had been waiting for years to be read. Subject line, "Clarice, here's the draft will." I didn't delete the original yet. The name attached to the message was unfamiliar, a junior legal clerk, judging by the email handle, not one I'd interacted with, but she had CC'd the message to her own personal email, a scared little insurance policy maybe, or a silent confession. Either way, she'd sent it. I clicked. Her words were cautious, too cautious for someone with clean hands. As discussed, I cleaned up the clause Carter wouldn't understand anyway. Rowena seemed cooperative about signature handling if she gets full inheritance access. Let me know if you want this version encrypted. My throat tightened. I reread it 3 times. Clause Carter wouldn't understand, I muttered aloud, leaning closer. They didn't just reword the will, they restructured it, deliberately, manipulatively. And the attachment? A file titled, Final Will Revised v3.pdf. But below that, tucked quietly in the thread, was the original, Dad Last Will Original Draft.pdf. My hand hovered over the trackpad before opening it. It was familiar, even, fair. It listed my name, clearly, my share. Half, just like Dad always said. The orchard, the house, the dividend rights. No special privileges, no fine print about control or sole authority. Just two names. Split assets. That version had Dad's tone. I could hear it in the phrasing. Then came Clarice's edit. Gone was my name next to any of the major properties. Rowena was listed as sole executor. Language like, in appreciation of her direct involvement, snaked its way through the paragraphs. They'd turned a straightforward will into a power grab. And no one, not Clarice, not Rowena, not even Dad, ever told me. I sat back and stared at the screen. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just steady. Focused. I copied everything into a secured folder, zipped it with a new password, and backed it up to an encrypted drive. Then I printed both versions and tucked them into a manila folder. I didn't call anyone. I just grabbed my keys and headed downtown. Naomi Rivera's office wasn't in a glass tower. It was on the second floor of a narrow red brick building between a bail bonds shop and a notary service. Unassuming. But the door was open when I arrived, and her name was on the window in clean serif letters. Rivera Legal, Probate Estate. Inside, it smelled like burnt espresso and printer paper. She looked up as I stepped in, late 20s maybe, dark blazer, dark eyes, and a kind of energy that didn't match the dusty office. "You're Carter?" I nodded and offered the folder. She waved me to sit and flipped it open before I'd even finished lowering into the chair. Silence. Just the sound of paper sliding. She read fast. At one point, her brow furrowed so hard the glasses resting on her head slid slightly. Then she stopped, pinched the bridge of her nose, and exhaled. "This isn't just shady," she said slowly. "This is criminal." I didn't say anything, just watched her. If Clarice pushed this through after your dad's stroke, and if the clerk's email can be verified as coming from inside the drafting process, this could be probate fraud. "She tried to hide it," I said, tapping the printout. "But someone, maybe that clerk, got nervous." Naomi nodded, already pulling out her own notepad. "Has probate officially closed?" "No. We're still mid-process." "Then you've got a window. A small one. But we'll need more timelines, witnesses, medical records, and—" She hesitated, looking at me. "We wait. For now." I frowned. "Wait? If they think you know, they'll lawyer up, but if they think they've won, they'll relax, make mistakes, talk too freely." She looked up again. "Let them think you're still grieving, still out of the loop." I leaned back. She wasn't wrong. "All right," I said quietly. "We wait." Naomi paused before adding, "I'll help. Pro bono." That surprised me. She saw the look. My dad lost our house because someone forged a trust after his partner died. I know what this kind of betrayal feels like. I don't like watching it happen twice. I nodded slowly. There was a kind of solidarity in her tone I didn't expect. Not pity, just clarity. She stood and extended her hand. "I'll be in touch." Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. The sun was already low over the rooftops, casting long shadows through the windshield. I watched the lines on the road, thinking through everything I hadn't seen clearly before. Clarice dropping off meals after the funeral. Rowena insisting we didn't need lawyers. Dad's wishes were simple. The way no one wanted to talk about the will, the speed of the reading, the tone, all of it. None of it was kindness. It was cover. When I got back to the house, I poured a glass of water, stood at the kitchen sink, and stared out at the backyard. The grass needed mowing. A few weeds had come up near the fence. Funny how fast things try to reclaim what's been neglected. "They think I'm the quiet one," I murmured. "The soft one." I looked down at the manila folder on the counter. The emails, the will, the tie. They forgot something else. I spent 15 years negotiating international mergers. I know how to play long. Tie rested neatly over my wrist as I stepped out of the car. There was a breeze coming off the bay, the kind that made your jacket shift and reminded you it was still early spring. I adjusted my collar, gave the valet a nod, and walked toward the glowing glass doors of the Hotel Langford. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Gold light spilled across the polished floor, and soft jazz floated in from the far corner where a live quartet played like they'd been instructed not to overpower conversation, just to tint the air. People turned. Not all at once, but enough. You'd think I'd set off some kind of quiet alarm. Eyes found me from over champagne flutes and sequin sleeves. It wasn't loud. It was alert. That hush when someone not expected, not invited, but not exactly out of place shows up anyway. I didn't rush. Let them look. I gave a few small nods in return, enough to acknowledge but not invite anything. Then I found table 9, close to the stage. Clean view of the mic. I slid the chair back, laid the tie gently over my lap, and sat like I'd always belonged there. Across the room, laughter rang out. Familiar, too familiar. Clarice. She had one hand draped on the shoulder of a man twice her size, her wineglass tilted just so. Another woman in rhinestones leaned into the joke, but Clarice wasn't looking at her. She was looking at me. Our eyes met. Her smile cracked for half a second before she caught herself and tilted her glass in a mock toast. As if I'd surprised her by showing up to a party she thought I wouldn't even know about. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was Rowena. Just behind Clarice, wearing a dark navy gown I knew she'd borrowed from the estate's wardrobe. She always liked to call it heritage couture, but tonight she looked tense, rigid. Her eyes darted between Clarice and me. Then she leaned in, whispered something close to Clarice's ear. Clarice's posture changed just slightly, almost like she braced. Her hand came down from the man's shoulder. The mask stayed on, but now it twitched at the edges. They weren't ready. Good. Dinner was served in 3 small courses, fussy but forgettable. I barely touched mine. I made conversation with a woman at my table, Diane Kessler, Clarice's longtime business rival. The kind of woman who built her fortune the hard way, didn't suffer fools, and had a memory like a lawyer with a grudge. We spoke about orchids, then about the gala's benefactor list. Then, just before dessert, I passed her a slim envelope under the table. She raised a brow, slipped it open. No words from me, just a glance and a nod. Inside were 2 sheets. One was the original will, the other, a printed metadata extract from that email I found. I watched her read. The corners of her mouth curled. She didn't look at me. She just muttered under her breath, "That witch." Clarice, halfway through a sip of wine, noticed the shift, saw the whisper, saw Diane's smile, and knew. The host tapped the mic. And now, a few words from tonight's co-sponsor, the always elegant Clarice Ashford. Applause. Clarice rose, smoothing her gown like she'd done this 1,000 times. She walked toward the stage with her shoulders squared, back tall, but the warmth in her cheeks didn't quite reach her eyes. She began the speech just fine, polished, slightly performative as usual. But then, phones started to buzz. A table to my left, 3 people passed one phone around like a secret had just landed. One man coughed and leaned into his wife, who whispered something and stared directly at the stage. It was spreading. Someone had forwarded the files. Not my doing. I had sent nothing. But Diane? She had more reach than a gossip columnist during a divorce. Clarice paused mid-sentence. Her voice hitched. Not enough to break the illusion, but enough. The ballroom wasn't loud anymore. It was watching. Clarice swallowed. Hard. Then pushed forward with the speech, but the charm had cracked. She rushed the end, thanked a sponsor, and gestured vaguely at the dessert buffet before stepping back. Applause came, but it was scattered, obligatory. As she stepped down, her eyes found me again. She expected me to gloat, but I didn't even smile. I raised my champagne glass once, slow and steady, and took a sip. That's all. Rowena, now white-knuckled around her clutch, slipped out before the cake was served. I noticed. Clarisse did too. She hesitated for a beat, clearly deciding whether to chase her or stay planted. She stayed. Of course she did. But the damage was done. The rest of the evening dragged like wet cloth. People danced, but not near her. Diane barely glanced her way after that. Her usual circle, gone. Even the man she'd been laughing with earlier made an excuse and left before the closing toast. I stayed, let it all happen around me. Not once did I approach her. I didn't need to. By the time I walked out under the dimmed chandelier lights, her lipstick had faded, and her eyes darted nervously to every phone she passed. Let her explain it away. Tomorrow I'd make sure the Bar Association got their copy too. Before I went home, I made one more stop. It was almost 9 p.m. by the time I reached Naomi's office, but the lights were still on. Through the window, I could see her hunched over a stack of case files, glasses low on her nose, the kind of posture lawyers fall into when they've forgotten to eat dinner. I knocked once before stepping inside. She looked up, her expression tightening with alertness. I didn't waste time. I wanted to get this in your hands tonight, I said, placing a manila envelope on her desk. Inside was everything: printouts, metadata records, a notarized declaration, a paper trail so clean even Clarisse couldn't twist it. Naomi opened it, scanned the first page, then nodded once. It's airtight. She paused, tapping a finger lightly on the folder. But before we file this, she said, glancing up at me, you might want to visit someone. I frowned. Who? She slid a sticky note toward me with a name written in careful block letters. Hal Bergstrom. He used to be your father's lawyer. I checked some old files. He's not listed on the estate proceedings, but his name comes up everywhere in the old paperwork. The name stirred something old and familiar in me. He's retired now, she continued. But if he still has anything from your father, it might help more than you think. I didn't answer right away, but deep down, I knew she was right. Sunday morning, I drove across the bridge into Bainbridge. The air was clean, salt-heavy from the sound, and the road curved like a quiet thought through pine and coastal grass. Hal Bergstrom's house sat back from the road, tucked behind a grove of fir trees. It was an older craftsman, well-kept but weathered, like it hadn't tried to keep up with time, just kept moving forward beside it. I parked, walked up the flagstone path, and rang the bell. It opened before the second chime. Hal stood there with a cane in one hand, cardigan hanging open over a soft flannel. His white hair was combed back, but his eyes, those were sharp. I wondered when you'd come, he said. He didn't ask why I was there, just stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and old books. We didn't say much as he led me to a small study where dusty volumes lined every shelf and the fireplace was already glowing low. I kept this for nearly 8 years, he said, walking to a corner cabinet and pulling out a small brass key from the drawer below. I hoped I'd never have to hand it over. He turned the lock with care. Inside, nestled among several faded legal pads and a wooden stamp box, was a slim, red file. He handed it to me. Executor Backup, C. Ashford, the tab read. I opened it with fingers I hadn't realized were trembling. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. The paper was thick, the ink slightly smudged at one edge like it had been folded in a rush. To my son Carter. If anything happens to me and I am not able to speak for myself, you must know, Clarisse has become too involved in matters of the estate. She has intentions I do not trust. I've seen her manipulate Rowena. I fear she'll try to manage everything when I'm gone. Do not let her act as sole executor. I trust you to protect what's left, especially Rowena, and yourself. Dad. Dated 4 weeks before his stroke. Signed, notarized. I just stared at it for a long time, the quiet of the room thick around us. You said you hoped you'd never have to give this to me, I finally said. Hal nodded, easing into the chair opposite mine. Your father asked me to keep it under one condition, that I only hand it over if you came to me first. He said if you never showed, maybe things had turned out okay. Maybe Clarice stayed in her lane. He looked over at the fire. But if you did come, it meant she'd done exactly what he feared. My mouth felt dry, but I nodded. Hal leaned back, his eyes gentler now. He was proud of you. You know that, right? I didn't know what to say. After a few minutes, I stood and offered my hand. He clasped it with both of his. Good luck, son. Back at Naomi's office Monday afternoon, the blinds were drawn halfway and the air smelled faintly of instant coffee. I laid the file on her desk, slid it across. She opened it slowly, read in silence. By the time she finished, her face had shifted. This changes everything, she said. This isn't just a defense anymore. This is a posthumous declaration. It can trigger an executor challenge, maybe even a full investigation. She looked at me, eyes dark with focus. If this holds up, and it will, you might not just be protecting yourself. You might be protecting the estate. I didn't speak right away. Outside her office window, the wind had picked up. Trees bent gently, shadows dancing across the sidewalk. They tried to erase me, I said quietly. But my father didn't forget. I pressed the file closed, the sound solid, like a door being shut for good. Now, we finish this. Clarice wanted control. Let's see how she handles an official investigation. I filed the paperwork on a Tuesday. Quietly. Naomi had everything in hand by the time I walked into her office, organized, labeled, marked with tabs that meant she was ready for war. By Thursday morning, the Ashford estate was frozen by court order. No disbursements, no asset transfers, no shady maintenance withdrawals under Clarice's signature. Just silence. Naomi slid the notice across her desk to me like it was a chess piece. They've been served, she said simply. I didn't ask how Clarice reacted when the documents landed on her doorstep. I already knew. She'd smile, pretend it was just a misunderstanding, maybe even try to spin it as someone else's clerical error. But I imagined the tremble in her hand when she realized the letter my father left behind had been read, in court, no less. The hearing started Friday. Early. I wore my father's old navy tie, the same one he used to wear when things got serious. I didn't wear it for show. I wore it for steadiness. The courthouse wasn't massive, but the gallery was already half full when we arrived. Local reporters sat in the back rows, whispering into their phones. A couple of neighbors I vaguely recognized from my father's Rotary Club were there too, faces pinched with curiosity and disapproval, like they were watching a family funeral and a scandal all at once. Clarice walked in 5 minutes later, dressed in pearl white, her lips painted the same deep red she always used when she wanted to look invincible. Her lawyer trailed behind her, a younger man with slicked hair and a worn leather briefcase. Naomi leaned over to me and murmured, "They're trying too hard." Judge Morton took the bench with no small amount of weariness, like he already regretted being the one assigned this mess. "Let's proceed," he said, tapping his gavel gently. Naomi stood, calm, assured. Her voice didn't waver once as she laid everything out. Every email, every misdated file, the subtle digital trails showing files were opened, edited, resaved under Clarice's login just days before the will was finalized. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then she held up the letter. "The decedent's own handwriting," she said. "Signed, witnessed, and notarized." The courtroom went silent. You could hear someone shift in their seat 3 rows back. Clarice shifted too, visibly this time. She leaned forward like she might object, lips parted to speak, but the judge lifted a hand before her lawyer could rise. "You will remain silent," Judge Morton said firmly. And just like that, Clarice shrank. Just a little. But I saw it. Naomi passed the letter to the clerk. The judge read it slowly, his brow furrowed deeper with every line. When he finished, he placed it flat on the desk in front of him and looked up. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "did you knowingly remove your stepson's name from the will, despite documentation from the decedent indicating his intent to include Mr. Ashford as co-executor?" Clarice's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes darted to her attorney, who fumbled with a legal pad and gave the most unconvincing half-nod I'd seen in a courtroom. I don't recall ever seeing such a document," she said finally, the veneer cracking. Her voice wavered. She tried to recover, tried to spin the same old lines about clarity and trust and streamlining responsibilities, but it was too late. The judge leaned back, removed his glasses, and spoke slowly. "Until further notice, Carter Ashford will serve as temporary co-executor of the Ashford estate alongside an appointed independent trustee." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Naomi didn't smile, but I could feel the pulse of satisfaction beside me. Clarice froze. No rebuttal. No performance. Just frozen. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the real chaos began. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted, "Ashford estate tampering, did the widow act alone?" Probate scandal rocks local legacy family. Was the will doctored? Clarice's lawyer shielded her from the questions, but the damage was done. Her name was already spinning through the news cycle, being typed into search bars, muttered in coffee shops. I didn't say a word, just kept walking toward the street where the rental car was parked. But before I reached it, I saw her, Rowena, standing quietly near the steps. She didn't say anything, just mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I nodded once. She deserved more than this circus. We both did. Inside, I barely made it halfway down the hallway before Clarice was on me. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice low and bitter. "You think this changes anything?" I stared back at her. She was trembling now, not with fear but with fury. The kind of rage that comes from losing control. "It's not about winning," I said, voice even. "But at least now, you're not holding the pen." She flinched, like the words stung more than she expected. And I kept walking. No more begging, no more dodging landmines in my own family. She tried to erase me. Now she's the one written out. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I walked out of the courthouse with Naomi beside me, both of us wrapped in the kind of silence that follows something heavy, the kind that doesn't lift easily, even when the verdict falls your way. We stood by her car for a minute. The fall breeze tugged at my sleeves. She was holding her binder tight to her chest like it still had more fights inside it. I glanced at her, waiting for something, maybe a smile, maybe a nod, but she didn't say anything. We both knew this wasn't about winning. That came a few days later, in a quieter courtroom with less tension in the air. Same judge, fewer reporters. Clarice didn't even show. Her attorney submitted a formal withdrawal as executor on her behalf, and the judge accepted it with no fanfare. Just a firm bang of the gavel, like he was finally sealing a chapter everyone wanted closed. He looked directly at me as he read the final handwritten note my father left with Naomi's discovery package, one that hadn't been tampered with, signed before witnesses, buried under paperwork Clarice never thought anyone would bother to look through. "He is my son, my legacy." That was all it said. 7 words. But when the judge read them aloud, something cracked in me. I didn't break down, not out loud. But I sat still as stone, hands clasped in my lap, breathing like each inhale had weight. Naomi slid a box of tissues across the table. I didn't take one. I just nodded, not to her, but to him. To the man who finally, in the end, remembered to say the words I'd waited my entire life to hear. After the session, The clerk handed over the official order reinstating me as co-executor of the estate, alongside an independent trustee for oversight. I signed on the line without hesitation, but I paused before I signed the next document. Rowena's College Trust reinstatement. Naomi watched from the corner of the office, arms folded, not speaking. "This is what he wanted," I said softly, holding the pen just above the page. "For her to have a future. One he didn't fight for back then. But I will." My signature landed in the lower right-hand corner. Naomi exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "That's it," she said. That was the last piece. I nodded, but I couldn't leave yet. That morning, before all of this, before hearings and affidavits and courtroom tension, I had just wanted to bring him the tie he forgot. The navy one, the one with the tiny stitched anchors near the seam. He'd left it in the back closet, and I'd found it by chance. A simple, worn strip of cloth. I remember folding it gently, placing it in a box, and thinking, it'll make him smile. I walked into that house hours later, ready to give something small, just a gesture, and walked out carrying everything I hadn't planned to. Now, as I stood outside the probate building under gray skies, the same tie was in my coat pocket. I wasn't ready to let go of it just yet. Naomi handed me a manila envelope, the originals, sealed and notarized. "It's all yours now. You're free to let this go, Carter." She didn't say it as an order. She said it like a blessing. "Almost," I replied. "Almost." That afternoon, I drove alone to the cemetery. The lot was quiet, dew still clinging to the grass from the morning. I parked under a rusting maple tree and walked the short path toward the Ashford headstone. Clean, elegant, no dates yet carved for Clarice beside his. I sat down in the grass. No chair, no umbrella, just me and the wind. "I hated you for years," I began. My voice didn't shake. It was plain, honest. "You looked right through me most of the time, gave me the scraps of your attention, made me fight for every bit of dignity I had left under that roof." I looked down at the envelope. "But you didn't forget me. Not really." I took out the signed trust document, Rowena's name typed at the top, the estate's seal stamped in gold. I laid it gently against the headstone, pressing it flat with my palm. "She's going to college, Dad. Just like you planned. And this time, nobody gets to take that from her." A gust of wind came through, steady and patient. I stood, let my fingers slide off the page. The wind lifted it. It flapped once, twice, then caught a current and floated away. I didn't chase it. Later, as the sun dipped low and the horizon softened, Rowena walked up beside me. She had that same guarded look she always wore around family, but now there was something softer underneath. She didn't speak at first, just walked over, placed a small bouquet at the grave, and stood beside me. When she turned, her arms wrapped around me without hesitation. It wasn't the kind of hug that says, "Everything's okay." It was the kind that says, "I see you." "I know." "You okay?" I asked, voice low. She looked up at me. "I think I will be." That was enough. We didn't need to stand there long. The sky was starting to shift to evening. We turned and walked back toward the car. Not fast, not slow, just steady. On the drive home, I didn't talk much. Neither did she. But something in the silence felt fuller than any words could have made it. I used to think silence was a punishment, a weapon. Now, it felt like peace. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table. The tie was still on the counter, folded neatly. I reached over, ran my thumb across the old stitching, and let myself smile, just once. Then I stood, turned off the light, and let the room go quiet. Some things aren't about closure. Some things are just about choosing not to carry what isn't yours anymore. You can lose a family. You can lose love. But if you don't lose your sense of what's right, you haven't lost yourself.